Hi, Georgie.
Hi, Allie.
It's really good to see you. Thank you for coming to talk to me.
Of course.
So I asked you to talk to me because you are a lactation consultant, breastfeeding success. You work in the hospital setting, and the topic of this week's article is enabling breastfeeding, making a difference for working parents. And it's actually the theme of the first week of National Breastfeeding Awareness Month. That's a lot of words, but week one of National Breastfeeding Month, that is the topic. And so I thought of you, and I thought that talking to you about this might be really helpful. And you mentioned that something that was really important to you to share with people is the idea that breastfeeding doesn't necessarily have to be all or nothing. And especially when you're talking to working parents, people who have to leave maternity leave a little too soon. And so what does that mean for breastfeeding? So that is what I hope to talk to you about today. But first, would you just kind of just tell me how you started doing what you do, or what do you love most about breastfeeding?
Well, I mean, what I love most about it is the incredible thing that human milk is in itself. I think it's an amazing and very valuable source of life, and it's an incredible thing to get to really advocate for its value. And human milk is magic. I tell that to patients a lot in the hospital because it can do so many things for their baby in so many different ways. And so I think that's what I just really love about it the most.
Okay. The milk itself.
Yes.
Great. Yeah. And so you mentioned that milk is valuable in any amount.
Yes.
Right. So what does that mean? Like,
yeah,
if you just do it for a few months or a few days or a few minutes, like
any amount. I mean, I think that, of course, with lots of things in life, we always think more is better. But really, when it comes to human milk and what it does for a baby's digestive and immune system, it has such a huge impact. So any amount that parents can give to their baby is going to be incredibly impactful for them, not only just in infancy, but as they continue to grow and develop, and their overall health as well.
And so human milk could come from you as the parent, but it could also come from someone else. I know that in the hospital you have a donor milk program, right?
Yeah, it's really something I feel always so grateful that we can offer to parents who are maybe needing to use supplementation for whatever reason while they're in the hospital. And the Mother's Milk Bank of Austin, provides this amazing donor milk. A lot of the donors are actually past recipients themselves, so I love it because it's also kind of feels like this big community of parents kind of helping each other out. And it's nice to know that parents kind of, in whatever way they're wanting to feed baby, whatever goals they have, we have options for them so they can make an informed decision about how they want to feed their baby.
Okay. That brings me to my next question. What's your favorite thing about helping families? Because I know a lot of lactation consultants would say, yes, I love milk. The human milk is amazing and fascinating. But really, I love helping families. And so what's your favorite thing about that?
Yeah, I think it's that part of helping parents realize that the decision that they're making is the best one for their family, and whatever that looks like. So really helping bring all the information to the table for them, discuss any questions, bring resources, that will help them along the way, but ultimately supporting them with whatever decision they're going to make, with how they're going to, feed their baby and take care of themselves as a family as a whole.
Yeah. whether that means breast milk or not, right?
Right.
You're
Yes.
there to help the family and
Yes.
help them figure it out. That's great. I know that can be really impactful, especially right after you give birth, which is a big deal. But to have someone there who's telling you, like, you're okay, you're the parent now, what you want matters,
Yes.
and the health of your family is the goal.
Yeah, and that you have options, I think, too, which it can be challenging, especially sometimes, yeah, right after birth, and you're recovering from a major experience, and now you're having to make all of these very, intense decisions. And I think just having someone there who can, be with you as you process this information and know that whatever you decide is going to be okay for you and your family, but that you have options and you have the right to know what they are, so you can make the best decision for your family.
Yeah, and I know you want the parents to feel confident,
Yeah.
more than anything.
Yeah.
Great. So then when they're looking at having to make those kinds of decisions for feeding their babies, and that might need to happen like right in the hospital, right after giving birth. And there's not just one way to do that, right? So it could be your milk, it could be donor milk, it could be formula, it could be some combination of those things. It could mean hand expressing milk, it could mean pumping milk. So there's so many different options. It is so important that people know all those options. And so we're very fortunate to have people like you there with us to help us with that. But how about a little bit later on, with this topic of, enabling breastfeeding, especially for people who are going back to work. What does that look like for most people? I mean, I know some people have to go back to work after 1 or 2 weeks. Some people get 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 3 months. What do you normally see, and how can people expect to kind of work with breastfeeding and going back to work?
Yeah, it's very unique to each situation. Absolutely, like you said, it varies greatly on how much time they're actually getting after the birth of the baby. But I really encourage them to be as proactive as possible. So, if they can, if I'm talking to someone before they've had the baby, I really kind of plant that seed of learning about how their supply works and how to establish good supply, and what it means to maintain one. Because I think sometimes when someone starts to believe they don't have enough of a supply, then that discouragement is there, and they feel a little bit maybe unsure if it's possible for them to continue to have a supply, and then they just decide to stop altogether. But truly understanding how milk supply is so different for every single person, and understanding what that means for them, and then whatever their goals are, knowing that it might look different once you have the baby. And so getting support as soon as you can, really, because it's you can do all of the preparation and learning before, but once you have the baby and you're doing like the hands-on work and you're seeing how your body is transitioning to having more milk, or not as much milk as maybe you thought you'd have, that's where we need the support and the system to help the family kind of through that. So knowing that and having that awareness, I think, is helpful in the first part. And then what tools you have. So obviously getting a breast pump as soon as possible is really helpful. If you can get one before the baby comes, that's wonderful. And then it's one less thing you have to worry about once baby's there. If you're getting it through your insurance and you have to wait until baby's born, asking for some part of your support system to help you with that process, whether it's following up with insurance or finding additional support to get that breast pump, so that if you're needing to go back sooner rather than later, you can start practicing pumping, and maybe starting to pump once a day in the morning after baby feeds, just to become familiar with that system, because it is a little bit of adjustment, and it takes practice for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so get a pump.
Yeah.
Right. What else can people do while they're still waiting for their babies to prepare for breastfeeding and to go back to work?
Yeah. Well, I think knowing your company's policies on how they're going to support you as an employee when you're needing to have pump breaks or feeding breaks, everything's different. And the Pump Act was passed, which is wonderful. But, some people work for very small companies and or for some reason they may not fit within the requirements under that act. So really educating yourself, okay, when I return, what are the expectations with my work, and how is the employer going to support me with getting the required pump breaks that I'm needing to support my lactation goals.
We were talking before, you mentioned, according to the Pump Act, it covers most employers, right? Most employers are required to provide a private space for you to pump while you're at work, and enough breaks to be able to do that. But again, if it's a really small employer, they may not fall under those requirements. They don't really have to do that. And
Yeah.
you mentioned before we started recording that, even if that means you get a little hand pump and go sit in your car for 10 minutes, right? That's what some people do.
Yeah. Yeah. Or if you have to travel, sometimes people travel for work, and sometimes security has weird things about liquids. So understand, go to the policy, whoever you're flying through or whatever the airport is, or through TSA, whichever, they'll have a policy, and make sure you could even print it out and bring it with you and be like, I'm allowed to bring my breast milk through security in this form. There's a lot to coordinate, but if you kind of anticipate all of those steps ahead of time, hopefully you can avoid having to dump your milk out, which is horrible, or, finding a place to pump while you're in the airport, or, just thinking about the kind of logistics ahead of time can help hopefully lower the somewhat stressful situation of having to pump on the go can be.
From what I understand, most people don't have to pour their milk out at the airport anymore, at least not very often, because
No.
they started making some better changes there, because that
Yeah.
was pretty terrible when that happened.
Yeah.
But as far as, going back to your job and figuring out how to make that work if you want to continue breastfeeding, sometimes people think I have to breastfeed a lot, and I have to pump while I'm at work, and I have to fill my freezer full of milk and for storage, right? So store up a big freezer full of milk so I have plenty. It's going to be an around the clock thing, and this is going to be my life for as long as I'm breastfeeding. But you and I know that's not the case, right? And you have to kind of break it up into smaller chunks, right? So the first, you had told me before that the first 6 weeks that you are lactating is a little bit special, right? And that's the time of, trying to set up a good foundation of milk supply, right? So what is that? Why? And what does that look like?
Yeah. So those first few weeks afterwards, and this varies a little bit for everyone, but on average, we say around 6 weeks is when your supply becomes kind of established. So just a little bit more routine. Maybe you don't have as severe engorgement anymore. The breast might feel softer all the time. Doesn't mean that you've lost your milk, but just your body's kind of regulated itself based on the demand. And your hormones as well. So your hormones shift so much during that period of time. And then around 6 weeks, it kind of diverts more to a supply and demand. And so really sustaining your supply has to do with how much milk removal is happening and how frequently. And that takes a hit sometimes when you change up your routine and you're not with baby all the time, or not able to pump as you were all the time, and now you're pumping in different environments, or less frequently, or more sporadically maybe, and that can have an impact for sure.
So if you're going back to work around 6 weeks, or at 1 month,
Mm-hmm.
it's probably really important to try to pump as often as the baby was feeding when you were home with the baby. Does that sound right?
Yeah. I mean, again, it should be really working with someone to help you as an individual, because sometimes some people are predisposed to have a higher supply. They just have a larger storage capacity, so they can hold more milk in their body for longer than others. And so it may be less impactful if you were not to pump as often once you go back to work than others who might be extremely sensitive to messing with that schedule. But I'd say in the early part, especially that month to 6 weeks, to protect the supply, more stimulation, more milk removal is better. So if you can pump on your previous schedule, that's great. And even if because pumping is different than direct breastfeeding. There's different mechanics involved, and it's not the same as far as how much milk can be removed. So sometimes it's even important for parents to add in like an extra pumping session once they get home, or even before they go to work in the morning, especially, just to kind of cover that little bit of difference that happens with milk transferred by machine versus milk transferred by a baby.
Okay. And so, but what happens if your work schedule, your work environment makes it too hard to continue on that kind of schedule of pumping and then feeding your baby when you're home? And what if you need to cut out some of those pumping sessions, or even all of those pumping sessions at work? Does that mean that you can no longer breastfeed your baby at all? That you're going to have no milk? Does that mean, a lot of people assume, like, if I'm going back to work at this time, so that means I can only breastfeed my baby until I get to this point, and then I switch to formula because it's not going to work to pump or feed my baby while I'm at work. So what would you say in that situation? Like, I cannot pump that often at work. I might only be able to pump once a day at work, or maybe even no times a day at work. Does that mean I have to stop breastfeeding?
Right. And no, it doesn't. So I would say, like, okay, once a day while at work, go with that and see how much you can, manage that, and if that feels sustainable to you. And then if it's not a possibility, the body's, it doesn't, like, it just turns off the next day and there's no more milk left. So the body still will be producing milk. It'll start to become lower and lower because of that less demand, of course, but you can still offer body feeding to the baby, at all other times of the day when you're with them, and during the night, and then during the day. Do what you can to make yourself comfortable too, because of course, at the beginning especially, we want to avoid issues like mastitis or clogged ducts. And sometimes if you go hours without pumping, all of a sudden, some people can experience those kind of issues. So just know to anticipate that just kind of switching it off might cause more challenges, and maybe thinking of a way to kind of slowly decrease if you really feel like it's just not a possibility for me to pump at work. And then also think about your goals, like, what were you hoping to do originally too, with kind of this in mind, with going back to work and kind of knowing the situation at your job. And all of that kind of is a big part in deciding what's a good fit for getting baby fed the best way we can as a family, but then also supporting the parents' mental health and well-being as well, which is just as important, and finding that balance, and ultimately a plan that works for everybody.
So even if you're not pumping at work, I mean, first of all, if you abruptly stop, like if you were pumping a lot and then you go to suddenly not pumping at all, you'll probably have some discomfort and some leaking issues, and possibly even infection or clogged up milk ducts, right? So if possible, try to, like, gradually step off, like take away one a week, one pumping session a week or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then breastfeed as much as possible when you're home, when you're with your baby.
Yeah.
Just feed your baby as often as they would like, and then you may be able to maintain that level of milk supply indefinitely, as long as you're continuing to do that when you're actually at home. So then, yes, I think that was it. Exactly what I wanted to know. I'm wondering, like, if you can continue to pump at work, how quickly can you shift from having to pump at work to being able to not pump at work without affecting your milk supply? Is there kind of like a cutoff where, like, okay, so I'll go back to work at 6 weeks and I'll pump for 6 weeks while I'm at work. And then after 6 weeks, it's going to get, I'd really like to not have to do that anymore. Or after 2 months or 3 months, like, is there a point where if I decide that's it, this is as much as I can do, where it would have the least amount of impact on my milk supply?
I mean, it'll always be impactful if you start to decrease milk removal or pumping sessions, and it just varies depending on really the individual set of circumstances for that person. But as baby gets older and maybe starts to introduce eating solids, so they're also getting food in other forms. Typically, people's supply changes when that happens, anyways, because we always say continue to feed the baby breast milk first, whether it's directly or at the bottle, and then offer the food. But still, that baby's intaking more food and inevitably will be a little bit fuller, and so starts to take in less and less breast milk over time. So I could see how that could be a goal for some people, maybe seeing if they can get to the point where baby starts to take solid foods, and then they can start to decrease if that feels like a more manageable goal versus like a full year. Because I know sometimes a full year can feel very overwhelming. And yeah, see how you can get to 6 months with pumping at work and having that for baby. And then once baby starts taking solids, maybe, adjust accordingly and see what you can do to, help make things feel hopefully a little less overwhelming.
Yeah. And that's usually around 6 months that babies start to eat solid foods. That's kind of just a guideline. Not all babies are ready right then, and some babies are ready even a little sooner than that. But that's just kind of a natural progression. That's just how it goes, even for people who don't go back to work, right? Babies start to eat solid food. They're interested. They want it. So they get less breast milk, even though we still try to prioritize milk, because they're, kind of just playing with food right at first. Yeah.
Exploring.
Yeah. Okay. So this is such an important topic. Thank you for being here. I think it's great that people can understand that even if they cannot pump at work, it does not necessarily have to mean an end to breastfeeding completely. Because like you said at the beginning, any amount is great. So even if you are sending formula with your baby to daycare or leaving formula with the caregiver, and then breastfeeding when you get home, it's most likely you'll still have some milk, even if it's not a full, supply of milk, and it's not what your baby can rely on 100%. Right. It's still milk, and it's still healthy, and it's still a great thing. So yeah, very important. Thank you so much, Georgie.
Absolutely.
It was great talking to you.
Yeah, you too.